This meeting is being recorded.
So I wanted to welcome everybody, and as we start every class, we are going to start by saying chapter 20, which is actually the chapter that I want to try to get to today to unpack a little bit. We have so much to do in the introduction that hopefully we'll get to that, but I do want to talk a little bit about chapter 20, Psalm 20. But before I do, as we start every class, we're going to say chapter 20. And I mentioned last week that as my list of people to say Tehillim for grows and grows, on one hand, it could seem a little bit overwhelming and challenging, but if we want to try to get a little bit of a more positive spin on it, it's how beautiful that we have this ability to reach out and to be there and to support one another. And we have this great medium of being able just to practically do something, to feel that we are connecting and that we are supporting ourselves and our friends in any time that they are going through challenges of any kind. So when we have more and more Tehillim groups, rather than seeing it as a negative, we can certainly see it as Kol Yisrael Arev Zeh Lazeh, that all the Jewish people are connected. We are all one body, and if one part of our body hurts, we all hurt, and we are all there for each other. So we are going to say Psalm 20 again. If you have a personal name that is not on the list, after I say the list, please say it out loud or to yourself if you feel more comfortable. These are the people today that we are praying for: Sarah Tamar bat Leah Devora, Tinok ben Rivka Hena, Reuven ben Sarah, Yitzchak ben Chana Leah, David ben Leah Mina, Henya Devora bas Bracha Devora Leah, and Aryeh Aaron ben Hensha. These are all people I know, people who are families or friends of mine, and people that connected to me personally. But again, even if you don't know this person that I've mentioned their name, we're all connected. So your tefillas will certainly help in whatever struggle they are specifically going through. So we're going to say Psalm 20 together. Lamnatseach mizmor leDavid, Yancha Adonai b'yom Sarah, Yisagevcha Shem Elahei Yaakov, Yishlach Ezracha mikodesh umitzion Yisadeka, Yiskar kol minchotecha va'olascha yidashne sela, Yitein lecha chilvavecha v'chal atzascha yemale, Naranana b'shuatecha uv'shem Eloheinu nidgo, Adonai kol mishalatecha. Ata yadati ki Hoshia Adonai Mashiach ya'anehu mishmei kadshai b'gvuros yesha yamino. Eila v'rechev ve'eila v'asusim v'anachnu v'shem Adonai Eloheinu naskir. Hema kara v'nafalu v'anachnu kamnu v'nisodad. Adonai Hoshia Hamelech Yanenu V'yom Karenu. So I heard somebody just mention that today is Tu B'Shvat, and it is. So before we get into anything, I wanted to unpack a little bit the beauty of this day, how it can resonate with us during our class on prayer. So the very first thing I wanted to mention is, yes, we have already gone through the first chapter and the 6th chapter of Psalms, and today hopefully we're going to get to the 20th chapter. And the first chapter of Psalms said that we should be like a tree that is replanted. We spoke about this by streams of water. And we know that Tu B'Shvat, which celebrates trees, has so many lessons that we can learn for our own spiritual journey and our own spiritual growth. And I heard this beautiful, beautiful story from Rabbi Jacobson that I wanted to share with you. because it's a story that happened, but it's just so practical and so beautiful, and a real message for us in our life's journey of trying to connect and trying to find a way to connect to Hashem, whether it's through prayer, whether it's through Tehillim. So in 1963, there was an excavation on Masada by an archaeologist called Yigal Yadin, and he discovered that Josephus was right, and that they found some storage there, and they actually found some date seeds. They took it back to Bar Ilan University, and there it remained for over 40 years. Nobody thought that there was anything other than these old, shriveled up date seeds. In 2005, a botanist decided that she was going to try to plant these seeds and see what would happen. She didn't have much hope for it, but sure enough, she planted the seeds, and lo and behold, these seeds that were from 70 CE started to grow. And this Professor Levy was so excited, she decided to call her little date palm Mesushelach, which is the name of the longest living person that we know from biblical times. And the date tree grew and grew and grew, and then she was very disappointed. She was disappointed because it was a male tree, and even though it was big and beautiful, it couldn't provide fruit. Years and years later, in the Judean desert, near Jericho, and the Qumran caves where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, another group of archaeologists also found some seeds that were 500 years before the first seeds. They found seeds that dated back to the first exile, the first temple exile. So they took these seeds to Kibbutz Keturah in the Negev, because it was the south, and it would be very a good climate to try to grow this date palm. And it started to grow, and they called this date palm Chana, named after the woman that we read in the Haftarah, somebody who so many years were childless, asked Hashem to give her fruit, to give her a child, and sure enough, she did. 6 years it took for this date palm to grow, and finally they took the pollen from Mesushelach, from that first tree, and they pollinated it with the flower of that second tree. So can you imagine, the first seeds were from the time of Masada, the destruction of the second Bet HaMikdash. The first seeds dated back to it was found in the area which was now which was Bavel, which was like present day Iraq. So this was from the destruction of the first temple. This was in the year of Ezra and Nehemiah and Mordechai and Esther and Haggai and Malachi, all these names that we read about, these biblical names that seem just like, ancient names in history. These seeds actually bore fruit. So they grafted these two, they pollinated it, and sure enough, these beautiful, beautiful dates grew. And they took them, they made the Shehechianu, and Joseph Abramowitz, who was one of the scientists, actually said that they were so emotional eating these dates that their tears, he said, could have irrigated again this whole area. Why? What was so beautiful about these seeds? Besides the fact that they tasted absolutely delicious and they tasted of honey. And we know that when the Torah says that Eretz Yisrael should be a land flowing with milk and honey, it is also Eretz Zavat Chalav Udvash. It is talking about date honey. So it tasted like honey. It had this beautiful, the riches of Israel, but it wasn't just a miraculous experiment that happened. What really this was for them and for us and for me, and that's why I found it so powerful and such a beautiful story to share on this day of Tu B'Shvat, because this experiment is really a metaphor for all of us. Sometimes we can be incubated or left 25, 50, how many years, and think, Judaism doesn't resonate with me at all. I'm too old, been there, done that. It's never, I'm never going to be inspired. I'm never going to grow. I don't have it within me. Some of us do things on a day-to-day basis, but there's no life in us, right? It's just like, okay, we do it again and again and again. But this is a metaphor for all of us, that basically we all have that little spark inside of us. We have the DNA, just like these seeds had the DNA that allowed it to get replanted and to flourish after thousands of years. We have the DNA of our ancestors in us. We have Abraham, we have Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. We have that DNA inside of us. We have those genes. And so that whole message of regrowth and replanting is certainly something that is that resonates for me on Tu B'Shvat. It's more than just an agricultural holiday, which it is, and we'll speak about that, but it is a holiday that we celebrate growth, and we can celebrate our spiritual growth. And when I heard about this story, and I'm actually going to share with you some pictures, because I know that pictures are worth 1,000 words. So I'm going to share with you pictures now quickly of these are the seeds. Can you hear me? These are the seeds. This is the beginning of the planting, that little sprout. This is the Mesushelach. And you see it has its name, Mesushelach. And this is the second tree. This is the Chana tree that grew. And these are the dates in the Arava Institute. And these are the beautiful, beautiful dates that actually grew from seeds that were dead and dried out for thousands of years. And this is the scientists and the people saying Shechianu on their date palms. So I just thought that was just so beautiful to see. This is, sometimes you see a story and say, really? Yeah, it really happened not so long ago. And the message for us is timeless. And I thought that was a beautiful message to share on Tu B'Shvat. And what does it have to do with Tehillim? It has so much to do with Tehillim, because Tehillim and any prayer is about emotional growth, emotional connectivity. And I think that today on Tu B'Shvat, it is about celebrating the trees, but also celebrating the message of the trees, which is about continual growth. And so I'm going to share with you something else I heard about Tu B'Shvat, another way that we can learn a lesson from trees that has to do with emotional and spiritual growth. It actually says in Tehillim, in Psalms 84:8, and I will read it for you here. Yelchu mechayel el chayel yera el Elokim b'tzion. You should go from strength to strength. And I don't know if any of you have ever heard this bracha, should go from strength to strength. Those words are actual David's words that are said that are gleaned right out of the Psalms, that you shall go, Yelchu mechayel el chayel, from strength to strength. But what does it mean to go from strength to strength? So the first thing we have to understand is that when we are trying to learn a lesson from Tu B'Shvat and learn about spiritual growth, what does that mean? What does that mean for us? spiritual growth. So have you ever tried to go down a down escalator? It's very easy. Hold on to the sides. I know I come from London, England, and they're very, very steep. You maybe have to go down to the side, and you go down a down escalator. Has anybody ever tried to go up a down escalator? I used to love to do that when I was a kid. The escalator was going down and try to run up. It takes a tremendous amount of effort to go against that downward motion. But the accomplishment of not that you should do it, it's very dangerous. But anyway, the accomplishment of, just trying to get there, one step is going down, that effort is what it talks about moving upwards. So there are 4 Rosh Hashanahs in the year. The Rosh Hashanah that we all know as Rosh Hashanah really just celebrates the beginning of the counting of the new year. And the way that was calculated, it was by the creation of man, right? God created the world a few days earlier by all the light and dark and the moon and the sun and everything. And then on the 1st of Tishrei, God created man, and that's when Rosh Hashanah is. So that Rosh Hashanah as we know it celebrates the creation of man, but it really is a calendar new year. Tu B'Shvat is an agricultural new year. It is exactly 3 months after the holiday of Sukkot. So the holiday of Sukkot is on the 15th of Tishrei. 4 months, right? Tishrei, Cheshvan, Kislev, Tevet, Shvat. It's 4 months after the holiday of Sukkot. So the holiday of Sukkot is when we have the blessing of water, and then this 4 months later is when that blessing is actualized. So even though it looks outside and it looks like really we're celebrating life, and we're celebrating trees, and we're celebrating growth when it's so miserable and cold and everything seems dormant, but in truth, this is the beginning of growth that not necessarily is seen. And we can learn a lesson from that, is that we all have the potential for growth inside of us, that, we might look outside and we might not see that there is much growth, but we all have it within us. Now, in Kabbalah, there's 4 different entities in this world. There is the inanimate, there is the growing world, there is the living, like the animals, and then there is the medaber, the humanity. In this growing world, right, where we have grass and flowers and everything that grows, trees are the only one that gets their special holiday. And the reason for this is that trees have something unique to its kind, unique to growing things, and that is that it never stops growing. When you look outside and you might see something that looks dormant, it never stops growing. Every year it grows that little bit more. Even if the height doesn't grow, it'll always produce more branches, or its trunk will get fuller and thicker. So for us, the message is clear. We can never stop growing. We have to, we have to use every opportunity to grow that little step. And that is one of the beautiful messages of Tu B'Shvat in our spiritual growth. And just that you should know that Tu B'Shvat was used as a way to calibrate, which was the old year as opposed to the new year. And there was a lot of agricultural laws that were used in the time of the Bet HaMikdash, that this day was very significant. Now it's not so significant, but we still use it to know when Arla is, which is the law that one shouldn't cut down any fruit from a tree within the first 3 years of its growth. And so when do we consider a tree to have 1 year, 2 year, 3 years? When do we count the years? We count it by Tu B'Shvat, by the 15th day of Shvat. So one more thing about trees and spiritual growth that I found beautiful. Trees have 3 specific parts to it. They have the roots, which is the anchor. They have the bark and the branches, and they have the fruit. The roots, which is the anchor, that symbolizes the most hidden part, perhaps the most integral part, because without strong roots, a tree won't survive. For us, That is our faith, our emotion, our thoughts, our prayers, our study, all the things that are perhaps not so tangible, but really set the basis for who we are. So when you are all learning together with me, and I say this is a journey because it's a journey for all of us that we're going on together, and we come away a little bit more feeling grounded, or we having that little bit more faith, or we're saying an extra psalm, we're intensifying our study or our prayer, that is all nourishing our roots. That is holding us strong. The branches and the bark and the trunk, that symbolizes action, mitzvot. But just like I can be separated, I'm an individual entity, trees cannot. As soon as they are separated from their source, they no longer are living, right? You cut down a tree, it no longer bears fruit. So all of our actions, everything we do, whether they're good or, whatever we do, whatever mitzvot we have, has to be connected back to our Judaism, to our spiritual source. And then the fruit symbolizes our biggest pleasure. What is our biggest pleasure? Is when we have grown to a point where we can help others. So that to me was a beautiful symbolism of how a tree connects to our own spiritual growth. But how do we know that we are actually growing and not repeating? Remember I said about that seed that was planted, like that regrew, those date seeds. And I said, it's a metaphor for us. Either we could have no connection, or we can just do something by rote. How do we know that we're not just doing, that we're actually growing, right? If you take a psalm and you just say, la, 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 and we're just doing it because that's what we do, we're prayer because that's what we do. We have a Friday night, we light our candles because that's what we do. How do we know that we're doing and not growing? And how we know that is from a beautiful verse in the Torah, which is from Leviticus, from Vayikra, and it says, Im b'chukotai telechu, if you will go in my statutes. And telechu has the very same words as we mentioned in the psalm over here, Yelech Mechayel El Chayel, because it doesn't mean to go, it means to grow. If you will grow in my statutes. So the first thing we have to know is that we have to be growing. How do we know that if we're growing and not just doing? So if something is really easy and there's no resistance, sometimes we know we're stagnant. Has anyone ever taken a pound weight and like, oh, look, I'm exercising? Not so much. You take a 2 pound or a 3 pound and you feel that resistance, then all of a sudden you know that because of the pushback, your muscles are growing. Sometimes it's complacency. It's that we just do things without emotion, without thinking. That is not growing. Growing sometimes is when there is a resistance, and sometimes that can also mean when things are hard for us. It doesn't have to be easy for it to be meaningful, especially if something's hard for you. If it's very hard to take a psalm and to say it every day, if it's not your thing to pray in the morning, if it's not your thing to do, to connect, then that's amazing, because it means that you're struggling with it, that it's not so easy, and that resistance will just help the growth. And look at these words, im b'chukotai, if with my statutes. Now, there's 3 types of mitzvot that we are given. We're given chukim, edut, and mishpatim. I'm not going to go into all the different types of laws because of time here. But what is a chok? A chok is an irrational law, a law that doesn't make sense. But it also means, from the word chok, can also come from the word to be engraved. So what are we saying here? What is the difference between engraving and writing? when you engrave something, it takes a lot of effort. It's not easy. I don't know, but like, if you've ever gone to a place where they have to engrave something, it's expensive, it's time consuming. Writing on a piece of paper is so much easier than engraving. So when there is effort, when something isn't easy, like I said, then we are growing. Another thing is that engraving becomes permanent. Writing we can erase, very easy to erase something that has been written, because it is not attached to the paper. It's not integral to the paper or the stone or whatever it is that you're engraving on. Once you've engraved, it has actually become part of that entity. And so that is the same with us and our spirituality and our Judaism. Do we have our Judaism as something that is separate from us? That is just, a hat that I wear. I happen to be an entrepreneur, and I happen to be, like shopping, and I happen to this, I happen to be a dancer or an artist or whatever it is. Oh, and I happen also to be Jewish, and I have my spiritual journey. That would be more like writing. Or is it engraved? Is it a hat that we wear that becomes part of us? Anyone here who has been blessed to be a mother, as soon as that day that we, that we had that child, it wasn't, oh, this is something else that I do, right? It's not like I'm doing this and this and this. Oh, and I also have a kid. That being a mother just became part of who we are. It became engraved as part of us. And I think that that is what the Torah is expressing here. In bechukotai telechu. If your spiritual journey becomes part of you and not just another hat that you wear, that is where we have the most potential for growth. And bechukotai, something that is irrational, when we put a limit to our growth, when we say, you know what, this is where I'm comfortable. This is as much as I can do, ad kan, right? Until here. Then we are not going beyond our rationality. If, for example, you are going to start a business and you say, you know what, my goal is to make $1,000 this year. That would be ridiculous. You say, well, you're limiting yourself so much. Of course, you're not going to grow. If you say my goal is $1 billion, the sky's the limit, and that would, you hopefully will grow exponentially. When we put a limit to our understanding of how far we can go, how much we can grow, then that is limiting ourselves. In bechukotai, if we not only engrave, but we do it beyond our understanding, telechu, we grow, that is a beautiful, beautiful way to have our own spiritual journey, and that it is not a separate part of us, it is integral to us. So these two messages of the ability for our Judaism, no matter how dormant it may seem, to be really part of us, and our ability to grow, just like a tree grows, continues to grow spiritually, emotionally. We have that. We can learn that from trees. Is something that I thought would be so beautiful to start our class today, to understand why nothing's by chance. And if we're having our Tehillim class on Tu B'Shvat, we can take some words of Tehillim, and we can know that every time you say a word of Torah, every time you say a psalm for yourself or for somebody else, and especially if it's not something that comes naturally to you, then you are growing, and you are going mechayel el chayel, from strength to strength. So I did want to preface this class on Psalm 20. Again, with a little bit more talk. We might not even have time to get into the meat and potatoes of Psalm 20. Perhaps we will do that the next class. But Psalm 20 is about calling out to Hashem on the day that we're really, really having a hard time. And I told you that I've been very honored to be part of many Tehillim groups where we, say psalms for people that we know or even people that we don't know. And one of these Tehillim groups, the grandmother gets on the group, and she always says words of inspiration. And there was two beautiful messages that she shared because she was trying to strengthen herself. And sometimes when we strengthen ourselves, we strengthen others, that I thought would be so beautiful as a preface to this Psalm 20, which is about calling out to Hashem and having the faith that Hashem will help us. So the first message that she shared is, I happen to be a music teacher for little kids, and I often sing the song, and I'm sure that you've heard the song, Hashem is here, Hashem is there, Hashem is truly everywhere, right? Where is Hashem? And we go up, up, down, down, right, left, and all around, here, there, and everywhere. That's where he can be found. So that's the song, and it's a famous, children's song. But if Hashem is everywhere, he's above the world, he's in the world, he surrounds the world. If Hashem is everywhere, the Kotzker Rebbe once said, where is Hashem? And he said a beautiful thing, I'll tell you where Hashem is. And his expression was, Hashem is wherever you let him in. And I thought that was beautiful. That sometimes we can understand things cerebrally. We can, I give a class, a 30 or 40-minute class, and it all makes a lot of sense about having faith and growing. So it all makes a lot of sense up here because we've let God in up here. But where is Hashem? Hashem is wherever you let him in. And if we have the capacity to be moved emotionally, to really incorporate these messages into our daily life, then Hashem can be really part of our lives in a very visceral and beautiful way. Because the distance between our head and our heart is quite big. It really is. And sometimes learning about emunah and bitachon, learning about faith and trust is really easier when we when it just becomes an intellectual exercise, when we have to actually, live it, it becomes not so easy. So when we bring our minds into our heart, when we really, really incorporate the messages, and we let Hashem in, that's when it can have the most beautiful effect. And learning in a time of ease is actually a very powerful thing. I'm sure many of you know, I have one of my sons was in the Sierra Golani, was in the special forces in Israel. And I was very proud of him when he was part of these special forces in the Israeli army. And I saw what he went through. And what he went through was the most intense training. He would have to run for miles and sleep out in the cold and carry huge things on his back. He was so mind and body ready, even in a time when everything was peaceful. Why? Because when he was called to action, and unfortunately he was ready. And I think that is the message for us. Yes, talking to Hashem on the day that we're having B'yom Tzara, as it says in Chaf Gimel, on the day that we have difficulties, is very, very powerful. But understanding and being ready and learning all of this and letting all of these messages in a time during our quiet time, doing that work during our quiet time makes us battle ready. It makes us that when we, God forbid, do encounter any challenges along the way, that we're fortified with all the messages that we hopefully has gone from here to here. And she also shared this story, which I found very powerful. It's a parable of a tightrope walker who came to these old-fashioned circuses. If you can imagine, now they don't have them anymore. It's not politically correct to have circuses with animals. But anyway, this one, let's say it was, because it was only a tightrope walker, more like a Cirque du Soleil kind of thing. And there was this tightrope walker, and he was about to go across, and he said to the audience, I can only cross this rope if you believe that I can do it. I need you to chant, we believe, and I'll cross. So the whole audience get up and they say, we believe you can do it. And he crossed the rope, no problem. It was really high up. And then he said, okay, he went to the audience, my act isn't done yet. Do you think that I can do this blindfolded? And they were, well, I don't know. Could you? I don't know. He said, well, I'm only going to be able to do it if you truly believe. So they all started chanting, we believe. And so he blindfolded himself. And sure enough, he got across this high tightrope safe and sound. Now everyone was really, wow. They really believed that he could do whatever he was going to ask next. And he said, do you think I can go backwards blindfolded? And sure enough, they were all screaming, we believe. And sure enough, blindfolded, he managed his way backwards. And they were all yelling and screaming. They thought this was the most amazing show. And then he said, I have one more trick to do. Who here believes that I could go backwards, blindfolded, hopping on one foot and dragging a wheelbarrow behind me? And everyone was saying, yeah, for sure. I can only do it if you believe. And all the kids were saying, we believe. And all the moms and dads, we believe. Yeah, you can do it. Yeah. And there was a little girl in the audience and she was getting so excited. She goes, we believe. And then the tightrope walker turned to the crowd and turned to the parents of that little girl and turned to the little girl and said, you really believe I can do it? And she goes, yeah, I do. I said, okay, then why don't you get into the wheelbarrow? And then all of a sudden, the place went silent. Why? That's the end of the story. Maybe it's not such a nice story, but it's a powerful one. Why? Because cerebrally they believed. Also, they were in the audience. It's so easy to believe when you are in the audience, when you're watching, when it is not part of you. As soon as Hashem says, do you really trust me? Can you be that little person getting into that wheelbarrow? Do you trust me enough that I will carry you and I will keep you to safety? This is what strengthening our emunah and betachan is, because if we give ourselves the ability to pray and we do believe with our full heart, then yes, we can get into that wheelbarrow, absolutely knowing that Hashem has us. So every tefillah that we say, every act that we do, every psalm that we say is allowing us to be fortified. It's allowing us to fortify each other. And all the learning that we do is allowing that whenever we come, as Perek Chaf starts, Yancha Hashem b'yom tzara, Hashem should answer us on our day of distress. It doesn't have to be only on that difficult day. It could be beforehand when things are going good, that we can fortify ourselves and know that we truly do believe that we're fortifying our emunah. So when God does tell us, get into that wheelbarrow, we know that we have the faith in him that he will take us to safety. So this, I guess, will be the opening class to Psalm 20, which we will continue next time. I want to thank you so much for joining.